I've stumbled tremendously with the writing of this speech. Each moment I begin placing words onto the page, I cannot help but question whether they are the right words. And I am finding that the more I hear the ominous click of the backspace key, I become more frustrated. Let me just say that patience is not my strongest suit, and I believe that if you ask most adolescents of today, it would not be theirs either. As youths growing up in such privilege, there is a certain inherent desire within each of us to want as much as possible. This is not to say it is selfish, nor is it unusual. However, what I have found, myself included, is that what we once would have considered a vision of sorts is now an expectation. Because of the endless opportunities splayed out before us, what might have once been considered a luxury or a rarity is now almost too readily available. And this isn't a bad thing, but as a result, I believe that we now have different ideas of what the realm we have grown up in should provide us with. Now, of course, this is not a light claim to be making, so to begin, it is important to understand what such an idea means. A vision, as I understand it, is far more reaching and difficult to create or attain than an expectation may be. Visions are not realistic. They are the ideal, the imaginary, the nirvana we might seek. They extend past material desires, and in simplest terms, visions are the utopian ideals we strive for. The way I see it, this is not the same of expectations. Expectations in our world are what we anticipate will happen in our lives. The root of the word coming from expect, it is what we believe should happen to us, or what we deserve of this world. Of course, in this regard, the two couldn't be more different. However, I believe that in the digital age that my generation, the youth of today, have grown up in, these concepts have become merged. Let's examine what this truly means in our reality. Not more than 20 years ago, the idea of having unlimited information at our fingertips extended beyond one's wildest dreams. It defined the idea of a vision for our world because it was hardly realistic for such a notion to exist. Being able to gain access to such sources was hardly believable, and yet, with the invention of the internet, this was no longer a mere vision. Now, it is expected that hundreds of sources should appear instantaneously. It is those unnerving moments waiting for my Google results to load or my documents to download that have made me consider taking drastic action. And the thought of being able to connect to the internet is too terrifying in and of itself. All of a sudden, no longer need we push ourselves to discover such information, to attain such a vision, but rather we expect such information to make its way to us. The same can be said of our trusty communication mediums that I've spoken to you about once before. At one time, sharing one's emotions, expressing our beliefs, and engaging in meaningful discussion required courage. In all honesty, it required actually seeing the person. But in the digital age, the click of a button has meant that emotional connection is hardly something to work towards. We almost assume that it will make itself known. So this vision, or hope of real emotion, seems to have been replaced by instant gratified moments. Being a Ziner-Cohen, I have been raised under the watchful eye of many musical greats, one of which being Jimmy Morrison. And this would not be a Ziner-Cohen speech without a little Jimmy. In the Doors' American Prayer, he cries out, "Let's reinvent the gods, all the myths of the ages, celebrate symbols from deep elder forests." There's no denying a certain ambiguousness within what he says, but for me, I have interpreted it as a plea for my friends and I, as the youth of today, to recognize the incredible magic that can exist within a vision, as opposed to an expectation. I find that it's within his choice to speak of reinvention that brings about such an interpretation. Perhaps I am nostalgic and naive about such things, though as a youth I'm inclined to think this is warranted. The American prayer is Jimmy's quest for our return to visions. But what about the Jewish prayer? Where does the Jewish youth of today create our visions from? We, as the youth of the Jewish diaspora, have been raised with certain promises that have transpired into stunted visions. Perhaps this isn't my place to say because I am one of these individuals, but I like to think that we are capable of more than mere expectation. In the Torah, Moshe has promised a land flowing with milk and honey, and throughout our history it is remarkable to see how the creation of such a state has come to be. After the first and second Aliyah in the early 1900s, Jewish pioneers who had traveled thousands of miles from the Pale of Russia worked to create a fertile land in which the best conditions could exist. The implementation of kibbutzim and strengthening of Jewish communities in some of the driest and swampiest areas of what was then Palestine were what transformed them into lush agricultural resources. And with the re-emerging ties of a Jewish community within the region, the fight for the State of Israel's existence came to a head at the United Nations headquarters in May of 1948. There was no expectation for such a state to exist. It was a vision, a quest for the land of milk and honey, and while the fight still persists, it was the sheer desire to create such a biblical ideal that brought it into reality. As the Jewish youth, I believe it should not be a mere probability for our homeland to simply be there, but rather it should be our vision for such a land to flourish. Let me say that as youth in the digital age, in the world of today, our visions are misconstrued to take the form of expectations. We are wide-eyed and ready to witness all that this world has to offer. Perhaps as our youth, as my youth shall see visions, all the dreams of poetic extremes that are sometimes disregarded will find a place once more. Our youth shall see visions, as the scripture of Joel once said, and as Jimmy spoke of finding the American prayer, my youth and I are responsible for discovering the Jewish prayer. Thank you.